In the video you are about to watch, I will be showing real images and video of a doll known as Peggy. Before continuing, I feel it is only right to warn you that this doll can allegedly bring about physical and emotional reactions in certain people and animals, from simply viewing a photo of it. Symptoms including headaches, chest pain, heart palpitations, difficulty breathing, nausea, lightheadedness, numbness, ringing in the ears, physical scratches and bites, nightmares, and an overall feeling of unease, as if someone is watching you. In the most extreme cases, contact with the doll via video, image, or in person has allegedly resulted in a heart attack, strokes, and even death in animals. Now, in the making of this video, I have seen likely every image and video of Peggy that exists. And I have actually met Peggy in person. I was in the room where she is currently being held, I spoke to her, and even met eyes with her a few times. None of which resulted in any of the symptoms I just mentioned. That being said, if you feel uncomfortable viewing images of the doll, I would ask that you simply minimize your browser window or scroll down to the comments section and just listen to the video, as opposed to shutting it off completely and ruining my watch time in YouTube's algorithm. Anyways, you've been warned. After the intro plays, it's free game. So we've all heard of Ed and Lorraine Warren's demonic Annabelle doll. Many of you are likely familiar with Robert the doll. You may even know of Okiku the doll, especially if you watched my video on it. There are many allegedly haunted dolls out there, some of them gaining more notoriety than others. But it has become apparent to me, and I find it quite surprising, that many people have not heard of Peggy the doll. Which, if the stories I'm about to tell you are true, is debatably one of the most dangerous haunted dolls on the planet. Welcome to Explaining Horrors, the series in which we dive as deep as we can into the most strange and terrifying cases of paranormal activity this world has to offer. Before we begin, I first want you to know that much of my research for this story comes from the book Peggy the Doll, A Very Different Haunting, written by the lead paranormal investigator on the case, Jane Harris. I will leave a link in the description to where you can buy this book if you're interested in reading the full story from the perspective of Jane, including all of her thoughts and personal details on the matter. Much of which I opted to exclude from the video to focus on the events of the case, and because they aren't my thoughts to share. But that being said, according to Jane, some of the names in this story have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. And I'm not sure which names those are. So keep in mind that the names you hear throughout the video, besides the names of Jane and her team, have potentially been altered. Without further ado, let's get into the story of Peggy the doll. On September 9th, 2014, a paranormal investigator by the name of Jane Harris, co-founder of HD Paranormal, received an email from somebody who, for the sake of protecting their privacy, Jane refers to by the initials JW. The subject of the email was simply doll, and it read, "Dear Sir/Madame, I am writing this in the hope that you can please help me. I have reached a point now in which I can't carry on this way. Let me just explain that I have always had a huge belief in the paranormal and the idea that spirits are all around us. I didn't know, though, that they could affect the living in the way that they have been affecting me. I can't talk to anyone about this, as I'm sure they will think I am crazy. Some days I wonder if I'm crazy myself. I have a doll here which I am sure is causing my house, maybe even me, to be haunted. If I hadn't lived through it for myself the last few months, I'd think that sounded completely insane. I read that you have a lot of experience, so please reply and tell me what I should do. The doll is no longer in my house, and I won't have it here. I can't sleep at all, and today is now the 5th day that I have been awake. No sleep at all. There is a figure that comes to me at night, stands at my bed. It's dark, a lady I think, but doesn't move or speak. I end up frozen to the bed in fear. I tried to put a cross on my wall and pray to Jesus, but it doesn't help. Please come soon. JW." Note that according to Jane Harris, the email was much longer than this, but she only publicly disclosed this excerpt. The sender described hearing footsteps on the landing outside of their bedroom, the strange figure at the foot of their bed, waking up at 3 a.m. every night, scratching sounds from within the walls, and various other disturbances. Feeling a sense of urgency, Jane, her husband Simon, and a local psychic medium by the name of Hazel Myers went to visit JW a few days later in Sheffield, England. In Jane's retelling of this trip, she notes that during the car ride to Sheffield, Hazel was noticeably quiet and bothered by something. She later told Jane and Simon that during the 90-minute drive to Sheffield, she had felt unusually uncomfortable, and that despite the drive being relatively short, she felt, quote, almost trapped in time. She claims that when she had asked her spiritual guides to surround her with light and protection, as she normally does before an investigation, instead of feeling a circle of light surround her as she usually does, a face of a man appeared to her and whispered 3 words: "They won't help." At the time, she didn't want to worry Jane and Simon, so she just stared out the window, trying to distract herself. But later she said, quote, "I knew we were driving towards something that would challenge us, and part of me was screaming inside to turn around and go home." Anyways, arriving at the home of JW, Jane notes that the woman looked exhausted, and that she had the appearance of someone who had been physically and mentally drained of all of their energy. Expecting to be let inside the home, Jane stepped towards the door, but the woman closed it partially, as to not allow them in, and said, "Not in here yet." She asked the woman how they could help her, to which the woman replied, "It's out here," and pointed to a gate on the side of the house. The woman then led them to a small brick garden shed where she had been keeping the doll. After a brief, unspoken deliberation, their medium Hazel went in first to retrieve the doll. According to the account, she almost immediately came back out of the shed with one hand on her forehead and the other reaching for something to support her. After collecting herself, she said that she felt nauseous and lightheaded, and asked that Jane retrieve the doll instead, stating that she had, quote, opened up too much psychically too soon. Jane found the doll wrapped in a thick red blanket on the floor, meaning that Hazel did not even see it upon reacting the way that she did. She carried the blanket outside and slowly unwrapped it, revealing a blonde-haired, blue-eyed doll. At this point, the woman known as JW was visibly trembling in fear and holding her hand over her mouth. Jane notes in her retelling of this day that she had never before seen anyone display such overwhelming fear towards an object. It was also at this moment that Jane had her first strange experience with the doll. She claims that her ears started ringing and then buzzing, and that she began feeling what she describes as a combination of realization and panic. Her head then started to feel numb as the ringing increased in pitch. This lasted about 60 seconds, but Jane states that it felt much longer. After this, having agreed to take the doll off of JW's hands, they went inside the woman's home where she described the experiences she believed the doll to be causing. Unfortunately, Jane has not made public her notes from this discussion. However, I think at this point we get the picture. Something is very wrong with this doll. A key piece of information that seems to be left out of Jane's retelling is exactly where this woman got the doll in the first place. On an episode of the TV series Deadly Possessions, hosted by Zach Bagans, it's noted that not much is known of the doll's origins, other than that it was made in England in the late 1960s, and that this woman, JW, had bought it at a yard sale. Anyways, before leaving, Jane had apparently asked the woman if she wanted them to keep her updated on anything they discover about the doll, to which she only gave a short but very clear and ominous reply. "That doll nearly ruined my life. I want to forget it ever existed, and I hope God protects you all." As per their usual investigation techniques, Jane and her team isolated the doll and set up a variety of devices around it, including night vision cameras, motion detectors, temperature gauges, audio recorders, and EMF meters, all of which were unable to detect anything of note for the few weeks that it was set up. Roughly 6 weeks had gone by since they first brought the doll home, and then, in November of 2014, Jane Harris fell ill. She describes her symptoms as debilitating fatigue, nausea, migraines, and dizziness. After 2 weeks of suffering with these symptoms, she was barely able to get out of bed. At first, her and her husband believed this to simply be the result of their hectic lifestyle, but after 3 separate doctors were unable to determine the cause, they started to worry. Jane was hesitant to believe that the doll could be causing her illness. However, she knew that her symptoms were the same described to her weeks earlier when JW was recounting her experiences with the doll. Their medium Hazel suggested that they remove the doll from the premises for a week or 2 to see if Jane got better and determine if it was indeed the cause of Jane's illness. But first, Jane decided to get a second opinion. She contacted a local medium and clairvoyant by the name of Patricia Redman and set up an appointment with her under a false name. She did this so that the medium was unable to research her before the appointment, having come across a number of fraudulent psychics before. Anyways, Jane went to the appointment with Patricia Redman, and she actually brought the doll along with her, but opted to leave it in the car at first, as she had not mentioned bringing an object when making the appointment, and wanted to see what Patricia was like, or if she would be able to determine Jane's reason for being there before introducing the doll. After saying their greetings, the medium said something very strange. She told Jane that, quote, "Your friends can come in too, if you like." Confused by this, Jane asked her what she meant. She replied, "Oh, I saw you arrive. Your friends might be cold sitting in the car. Just a thought." Jane informed her that she had come alone. The medium then asked if Jane had arrived in the black 4x4, to which Jane confirmed that she did. And then the medium asked, "Wasn't there a man and woman with you when you pulled up?" Again, Jane reassured her that no one had come with her. At this point, she expected the medium to just begin the reading. However, a strange feeling had come over them both. A feeling of uneasiness. The medium then stood up and stepped away from the table while holding the side of her head. She apologized and then walked towards the window. Jane assumes that the woman was looking for her car to see if she was lying, or in anticipation to see the 2 figures that they both seemed to have realized in that moment were spirits. Right after that, the medium unexpectedly apologized and told Jane that she can't do a reading for her today, claiming that she had a terrible headache and that the energy in the room was quite heavy. Jane notes that the woman seemed anxious for her to leave. As she left, the medium had her head down and was whispering something to herself. It's clear from Jane's account that this medium had seen something in Jane's car where the doll was that made her extremely uncomfortable and didn't want anything to do with it. With more questions now than answers, Jane decided to take Hazel Myers up on her previous offer. On November 13th, 2014, Hazel took the doll in the hopes that it would relieve Jane of her illness. Just 4 days later, Jane was feeling normal again. Jane believes that this was caused by what they refer to in the paranormal world as a psychic drain or psychic attack. The concept of a spirit draining the energy of the living either intentionally or unintentionally just by being in their presence. Many paranormal investigators believe that prolonged spiritual presence can lead to feelings of extreme fatigue, dizziness, and other related symptoms. Hazel kept the doll for 3 weeks, at which point Jane decided it was time to take it back. Jane recounts that before taking the doll back into their home, Hazel cast a psychic protection around her and her family in an attempt to prevent the reoccurrence of this energy draining, which she claims to have worked as she did not fall ill again. However, Jane notes that during the period of November 2014 to January 2015, there was a great deal of unrest and unhappiness amongst her family and colleagues that had come in contact with the doll. In fact, for the entire 18 months in which they had the doll in their possession, Jane notes that Hazel Myers' health had been slowly declining, and that during seances with the doll, they had witnessed her completely lose energy while in contact with the spirit or spirits connected to the doll. But in the time frame of November 2014 to January 2015 specifically, she said that people were not quite themselves, and that, looking back on the time, it seems as if a wedge had been driven between her and her husband, without them really noticing. They were distant for no explainable reason. In her book, Jane says that she has done a lot of research on theories surrounding supernatural entities and their abilities to affect relationships, stating that it is well documented that darker, sometimes demonic forces who enjoy human suffering may seek to wreak havoc and destroy relationships. She states that she is in no way claiming that the doll has a demonic presence attached to it, but that as time goes on, she cannot be sure beyond a doubt that it does not. That being said, Jane Harris is a Catholic, but not a fully devout one, and she has her own skepticisms when it comes to religion and God. Still, however, during the investigations, she placed a set of rosary beads around the doll's neck before they began studying her. She notes, however, that in doing this, she was not attempting to provoke any potential entity attached to the doll. She just felt that in doing so, part of her was openly asking for help and protection from a higher power, but that the thought of the doll having a demonic presence actually never crossed her mind at that time. In February of 2015, HD Paranormal shared a picture of the doll on their website, the picture on screen now. It was common for them to update followers on their cases, including photos, evidence, theories, etc. However, when they shared this image, the responses they got were strange, to say the least. Keep in mind that at this point, the doll had no reputation whatsoever. No name and no details of the case were shared. According to Jane, their website on average received roughly 12 messages per month. However, on February 25th, 2015, when they posted the photo of the doll, they received over 60 individual messages within the first 24 hours, and another 37 over the following 24 hours. I will now read some of these messages. Jane, when you get a chance, can you contact me please? I've had a migraine and palpitations since seeing your doll. This doll you've just shown starts off my asthma. What's that about? Don't like it. I am not a psychic medium, not even that sensitive really, Jane, but I feel so very sick and spinny when I see that new doll of yours. I just think it's her energy. Do you feel it in person? At one point after I'd seen your photograph, I was thinking about her eyes, and I felt like the floor was moving, like I was on a ship or something. Like travel sickness is the only way to describe it. Do you think that it's an evil spirit or a demon here for a purpose? Hope you don't think I'm crazy, but I'm sure it's not just me. You should know that the doll you're working with is now having a strange effect on me. Since I saw the picture last night, I felt like someone is in my home off and on watching me. At around midnight last night, I had her image on the monitor when it started distorting and flickering. I then heard something like shh before going cold down my left side. I had to turn the monitor off. This is weird. Can dogs and cats sense evil? Since I opened the photo of that doll, my little terrier Molly has been snarling and growling at the screen. I'm a bit freaked. New doll, OMG. Guys, I opened her photo and my dog started going crazy, spinning in circles barking. I switched it off, he stopped. Switched it on, he started again. Now he's hiding and trembling. WTF. HD Paranormal was flooded with messages like these describing physical and mental reactions caused by the photo in both humans and animals. Here's the thing though. The contact submissions on their website by which these messages were being received are confidential. This wasn't like a comment section where people could see previous messages and leave similar ones. That being said, mass hysteria, placebo, or attention-seeking copycats were immediately ruled out. They had even considered for a moment that it could have been some sort of prank involving someone or a group of people using various emails. However, not only does that seem a little excessive and not worth anyone's time to create over 100 emails and send different messages from each one, they also followed up on every email and confirmed that these were in fact different people from all over the world. It seemed the doll could cause reactions in people who were not even in its physical presence. In Jane's book on the case, she goes into detail about some of the messages they received regarding the reactions of animals, some of which are quite disturbing. According to the messages they received, the doll would more often have an effect on dogs than cats, but cats were evidently not safe either. Potentially the most disturbing story was sent to them from a woman in Virginia, who explained that every time she took an interest in Peggy, be that looking at images or watching video, she would have vivid dreams in which her cat was being chased by something she couldn't see. The dream would end with the cat being caught and strangled to death outside of her front door. 3 months after this woman had seen Peggy and began having these dreams, she got up one morning and found her cat dead at her front door. Jane leaves out the graphic details that were provided to her, but according to the woman, it was clear that the cat had been strangled to death by someone or something. It's a fairly common belief when it comes to the paranormal that animals are able to see or sense things that humans cannot. In many cases of alleged paranormal activity, it's often reported that dogs will bark and growl at unseen threats or cower in fear for no obvious reason. On February 29th, just a few days after the initial wave of messages about the doll, a man named Darren Holder from Manchester, UK, reached out to Jane. Keep in mind that at this point, none of the other messages had been made public, and so nobody was aware of other reports involving the reactions of dogs and cats. Darren stated that he was looking at a photo of the doll Jane posted online, and his staffy started barking at him. He says that he had owned the dog for 5 years, and this behavior was out of the ordinary. Darren was unable to calm his dog down. It began running in circles and then ran into the bathroom and hid in the bathtub, something that Darren had never before seen his dog do. He carried the dog back into his bedroom and it began to freak out again, this time very clearly barking at his computer monitor where the picture of the doll still remained. Darren closed the page with the photo and his dog calmed down. Over the next few months, HD Paranormal received even more messages regarding people's pets reacting in these ways or worse when seeing a photo or video of the doll. I'm not going to read out every message word for word because they are a little on the longer side, but I'll give you a summary of some of the things people reported in regard to their pets. April 2015. Joanne Cobb, a woman from Phoenix, Arizona, reported that she was watching a video of Peggy next to her dog when her dog suddenly suffered a seizure, something her dog had never had problems with until that point. The vet ran CT scans and MRIs, but was unable to determine a cause. The dog was brought back home and returned to normal, until Joanne watched another video of Peggy. Her dog once again suffered a seizure, and at the time of messaging Jane and her team, the dog had passed away. Again in April 2015, Tiffany Bovitz of Mounds View, Minnesota, claims to have asked Peggy to visit her in a dream. That night, she had a terrifying dream in which she was talking to her boyfriend about how to get a demon to go away, when she looks out her window and sees what she describes as a, quote, weird female marsh-looking demented demon creature in her neighbor's yard. She tries to make it go away by, quote, trying to talk and cast it away, but struggles to do so, comparing it to when you try to run in a dream and you are unable to run properly, as if you are running in water. The demon, as if to counter whatever Tiffany was saying, was speaking in what Tiffany describes as some scary foreign language. At this point, Tiffany snapped awake in fear. It was a little past 3 a.m. and she was unable to go back to sleep. A little over an hour later, at 4:20 a.m., her boyfriend came into the room and said that something was wrong with his dog, Maisie. They had to rush the dog to the emergency vet, and they were told that it was good they came when they did, as Maisie had, quote, some severe GI thing, and the vet said she would have died that night had they not brought her in. Tiffany believes that this was somehow in connection to Peggy and her dream. June 2015, Julie Watson, a Labrador breeder in Norwich, UK, reports that her 18-year-old daughter had taken an interest in the paranormal and was often showing her video and photos of the doll in the kitchen during the feeding of their pregnant Labrador Holly. Shortly after this, Holly gave birth to an entire litter of stillborns. A first for Julie, and apparently not a very common event. Typically, if there is a stillborn, it's only one puppy, but the entire litter is an inexplicable tragedy, especially when just 2 weeks prior, Holly was checked by the vet and all was well. She notes that when she thinks back on it, Holly was present every time her daughter and her looked at photos or video of Peggy, and that on one occasion she was whining, but at the time they had just assumed it to be normal pregnancy pains. August 2015, Brian Cartwright of Solihull, UK, said he was using a picture of Peggy as his wallpaper on his phone. That's very fucking weird, Brian. Before this, his corgi Peanut had never taken any interest in his phone, but after seeing the wallpaper, he would bark at it whenever the screen would light up with a notification, sometimes running out of the room. One day, Brian had lost his phone and found it half buried in the garden where Peanut usually did his business. After removing the Peggy wallpaper, Peanut never took an interest in his phone again. As I was saying, it became abundantly clear that Peggy and dogs did not mix. But messages regarding physical symptoms, unfortunate or agitated animals, and feelings of being watched were not the only messages they were receiving. Of the 60 plus comments they received on the 25th of February, 28 of them, almost half, were in regards to the rosary cross Jane had placed on the doll's neck. Some of them mentioned that they felt a need to remove it, or that they had a strong gut feeling it should be removed. Others claimed to be hearing a voice telling them that the spirit hated the symbol of the cross, and others claimed to have had dreams indicating that the cross would bring about negative reactions. One of the stranger things that appeared in more than one message was that some people felt the doll had a connection to the Holocaust, and also a fear or hatred of institutions, which are both very oddly specific things for multiple strangers to mention without knowledge of each other's statements. A number of messages also suggested using the Star of David as a trigger object. With all that in mind, it seems as though the doll may have some sort of Jewish connection. But as crazy as all these physical reactions and messages seemed to be, it was far from the worst of it. On March 16th, 2015, Jane and Hazel had planned to have an automatic writing session with the doll. This is a practice also called psychography, in which a medium holds a writing instrument such as a pen or pencil and allegedly allows spirits to manipulate their hand to write words on a piece of paper. A similar concept to a Ouija board, although sometimes it involves the medium going into a trance-like state. The photo on screen now shows the words that Hazel produced on the paper. Lindy, girl, explanation, draw a line. Now, these words on their own don't really mean anything. However, they were shared publicly shortly after the session, and that afternoon, Jane received a message from a woman named Lindy who was in disbelief at the results. Lindy claims that at the time the automatic writing session was being held, she was having a long overdue talk with her daughter. The topic of this talk was not shared, however, afterwards they both agreed to, quote, draw a line under things and move on. So, obviously, if Lindy was telling the truth, the results of the automatic writing session are oddly accurate. It's also worth noting at this point that, according to Jane, a seance was held sometime in February of 2015, and it was at that time that Hazel allegedly made contact with a spirit named Peggy, or Margaret, which Peggy is sometimes used as a nickname for, that was attached to the doll. Later on, they received the same name from a psychic named Chris in Wales. They at this point determined that the name Peggy was significant because Chris and Hazel do not know each other, nor had they had any contact whatsoever for Chris to have known about the name prior. But the name wasn't the only thing Chris claims to have learned. Chris, while looking at photos of Peggy, came into contact with a spirit that not only told him that her name was Peggy, but also that she was 19 years old, born in 1946, lived in Holland Park, died of an asthma attack, and that she was not happy because she was not Christian, which is believed to be in reference to the cross Jane had placed on the doll's neck, which had been unknown to Chris at the time. Jane, however, believes the date of 1946 to actually be the year of Peggy's death, and not the year she was born. You see, they had apparently received the location of Hyde Park as well during one of the many sessions with the doll. Hyde Park being just west of Holland Park in London, so in the same general area. Jane and her team searched through national records from the area and found that in 1946, a girl named Peggy Hines had died at the age of 22 while living in Fulham, which is just 2 miles from Hyde Park. Jane believes that it's possible that Hyde Park was the location of Peggy's death. But anyways, let's get back to that automatic writing session in March of 2015. Whatever words were produced became hardly important, as they were overshadowed by something far more terrifying that occurred elsewhere during this session. You see, on the way to the session, Jane decided to film a video in her car explaining what her and Hazel were about to do for her social media following. The video in question features the doll in the front seat next to Jane. She recorded the quick video and posted it on Facebook immediately after. By the time she arrived at the home of Hazel Myers, she had a Facebook message from a woman in Glasgow by the name of Katrine Redick. The messages shared between the two are as follows. Hi, what's going on with Peggy? My heart is racing so fast and I feel dizzy. I'm in pain. After I saw your post, it vanished from sight and my phone went crazy. I know, the first vanished? Yes. She is affecting people currently. I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. My heart is like racing horse. Jane confirmed that the post had in fact been inexplicably deleted from her page, but at this point just assumed it to be some sort of technical glitch. At 12:45 p.m., Jane and Hazel began the automatic writing session, placing Peggy on a small chair by the fireplace. Before entering her trance, Hazel told Jane that she felt as though they were going to provoke something that day. She didn't know what, but she just felt like something was going to happen. During the session, they were asking Peggy, or the spirits attached to Peggy, for a sign, anything to confirm their presence. And as I explained, nothing overly remarkable occurred besides Hazel producing some words on the paper. However, the following day, Jane was given some very alarming news. Within the 1-hour period that they had been conducting the automatic writing session, Katrine Redick, the woman who had messaged Jane that day, had suffered a heart attack. Of course, coincidences do occur, however, given the other messages Jane had been receiving from people, and the timing of Katrine's heart attack, it was hard to ignore the possibility that Peggy had been the cause of this. Jane notes that while Katrine wasn't physically there during the session, she was psychologically present. Having just taken interest in the case, being aware from Jane's video that they were about to do an automatic writing session, and being in the mind of Jane having just spoken to her prior to the session. That being said, it was likely at this point that Jane and the others realized that the doll they had in their possession was potentially more dangerous and powerful than they could have imagined. In May of 2015, they decided to stop publicly posting information on Peggy's case to their website and Facebook, and instead formed a group for people who, despite the risks, still wanted updates on the doll. In light of Katrine's heart attack and the fear that something far more evil than a human spirit might be attached to this doll, Jane consulted a spiritualist church called Light of the Spirit in West Midlands, where a Reverend Martin Jenkins authorized them to hold a seance with the doll on March 30th, 2015. Present at the seance was the Reverend Martin Jenkins, a note-taker by the name of Donna Griffiths, who was also a member of the church, and then of course Jane, Simon, and their medium Hazel, who led the seance. In the room in which the seance was held, there was a table at which the 4 participants would sit, and the doll was placed nearby with a few devices. An EMF meter, or K2 meter, which is a common device in ghost hunting used to measure fluctuations in electromagnetic fields. These are used in a variety of settings outside of ghost hunting as well, but paranormal investigators believe that the presence of a spirit can cause disturbances in electromagnetic fields, and so they use these devices to detect that. These meters usually have a color-coded scale in which green is the lowest reading and red is the highest. Also near the doll was a temperature monitor. The seance was held via a pendulum board. This is a circular board that typically contains letters and some basic answers like yes, no, maybe, etc. This is a similar concept to a Ouija board, except instead of all of the participants putting their fingers on a planchette, the medium holds a pendulum over the center of the board and asks questions. The idea is that the spirit would then use that pendulum to give responses by swinging it towards the letters or answers laid out on the board. I will now read to you an abbreviated version of the notes from this session. 11:20 p.m. Martin recites a blessing and the participants join hands. Hazel requests that Peggy joins them if she is present. There is a short period of silence and then the EMF meter flickers to red. 11:23 p.m. Hazel asks Peggy to confirm her presence by affecting the EMF meter again. The meter once again flickers to red, indicating a confirmation. Temperature reading is 18 degrees. Hazel questions Peggy about her purpose for not crossing over into the light. Hazel reports to the other participants that she sees a female apparition standing by the altar next to the doll. Hazel asks Peggy what is wrong. No response. Simon reports suddenly feeling colder. 11:27 p.m. Temperature reading is 16 degrees. EMF detects no fluctuation. 11:30 p.m. Hazel asks Peggy to use the pendulum and board to communicate her wishes. There is immediately a violent swing towards Jane, making the participants jump. EMF meter shows fluctuation at orange. Donna reports hearing a faint laughter, but none of the other participants confirm this. Temperature reads 16 degrees. 11:32 p.m. Hazel, was that you, Peggy? Pendulum swings to yes. Hazel asks a series of questions while confirming to the other participants that the female apparition is still standing by the altar. Hazel, do you fear crossing over into the light? NOFEAR. No fear. 3-second pause. NEXT. Next. Are you happy to be communicating with us? HAPPY. Happy. 10-second pause. MORE. More. Peggy, were you responsible for a recent health problem? No. Are you aware of the lady we mean? Yes. 55-second pause. WEAK. Weak. What do you mean, Peggy? TAKE. CARE. HEART. HELP. Take care, heart, help. Were you trying to help? Yes. Do you feel you have a purpose here? Yes. 7-second pause. IKNOW. I know. What do you know, Peggy? TOOMUCHFORME. Too much for me. Hazel asks Peggy to step forward and make herself known to the group. Martin and Jane both report feeling cold. Jane displays goosebumps on her right arm. 11:55 p.m. Temperature reading is 8 degrees. Jane reports that she can, quote, see her in regards to the female apparition next to the doll. It's noted that Jane later provides a vague description of this apparition to Hazel, which she confirms to be the same one that she was seeing. 11:58 p.m. Martin asks that Peggy respect his church and give clear indications of how to assist her. There is then a faint tapping sound on the window on the opposite side of the room. Everyone present confirms hearing the tapping. Hazel reports that the apparition has vanished. 12 o'clock a.m. Hazel requests that everyone continue to hold hands as she attempts to re-establish connection to Peggy. Simon reports the feeling of a hand on his shoulder. Sensation lasts 5 seconds. Hazel, Peggy, we know you're still here, so please speak with us. 15 minutes go by with nothing of note occurring and nothing recorded. 12:17 a.m. The pendulum moves again. LINDYHARRYGREENSTARSOON. Lindy, Harry, Green, Star, Soon. Martin, can you be clearer, Peggy? Is this a warning? Yes. 12:25 a.m. Hazel asks Jane to speak to Peggy directly. Jane, Peggy, do you need our help to move on? No. 12-second pause. TELLTHEM. Tell them. Tell them what? ALL. All. 12:29 a.m. Temperature reading is 16 degrees. Hazel, Peggy, are you still here? No response. EMF meter reads green. Donna comments that the room feels, quote, normal again. Participants agree to close the session. So within this session, the group had allegedly received clear answers from a spirit attached to the doll who answered to Peggy. And both Hazel and Jane had seen a full-body apparition of a female figure standing in the room with them. Jane describes this figure as being obviously a woman, but having no discernible facial features, almost as if her face was blurred. For Hazel, the figure was there for most of the session, but Jane reports only seeing it for an instant. As soon as she had seen it, it seemed to have faded away. And as it faded away, Jane reports seeing what she describes as tiny twinkles of light. In April of 2015, Jane decided to ask Peggy questions that were sent in by her followers and film it. She set the doll up in her basement with candles lit and an EMF meter. While she did get some responses with the EMF meter, it was for the most part a pretty uneventful session. That was, however, until the doll fell over. Jane didn't realize the doll had been moving at the time, but when she played the footage back at 3 times speed, she noticed that the doll had been slowly leaning away from her as she asked the questions. Note that the video actually cuts off before Peggy falls over completely, but Jane claims that her laptop froze at that point and no further video was recorded. This is actually the only instance in which the doll was reported to have moved. Jane notes in her book that the spirit attached to the doll seemed to have no interest in making the doll perform in this way. Jane also claims that immediately after the session, she experienced nausea and headaches. Now, obviously the doll was likely just not sitting properly and slowly fell over. However, when Jane uploaded the video to their YouTube channel, it received more attention than she had anticipated. The clip was picked up by local and national news, as well as a variety of paranormal blogs. Suddenly, there were discussions about Peggy popping up all over the internet. A couple months later, the Daily Mail website shared a video of Peggy, and Jane's sister-in-law was watching it. As she was watching it, she described suddenly feeling unwell. She laid down and was then hit with a piercing headache that lasted about an hour. A few weeks later, she showed the clip to one of her friends who, while watching the video, began to experience chest pains. Chest pains that mysteriously went away as soon as she stopped watching the video. It's worth noting that according to Jane, this friend had not previously heard of the instances in which the doll was causing these symptoms in people. So, if that is to be believed, then the power of suggestion can be ruled out here. While we're on the topic of videos, HD Paranormal also uploaded another video of Peggy that made its rounds on the internet. In the video, Peggy is being filmed outdoors in a garden when a voice can be heard. The video interprets the voice as saying merci. It's unclear if this is a spirit saying thank you in French or the English word mercy, or if it was even a voice at all. HD Paranormal claims that Jane did not hear the voice while recording the video, and that several attempts were made to recreate the sound, but it was ultimately unsuccessful. Of course, with this newfound fame came more testimonies from people around the world claiming to have been affected by Peggy in some way. Not that these messages ever really stopped from the beginning. I will now go over some of the more interesting testimonies sent into Jane throughout the course of her ownership of Peggy. But keep in mind that, unlike the initial messages they received before people knew who Peggy was, these testimonies could obviously be attention seekers or people experiencing a placebo effect based on what they already know about the doll. March 2015. Jane received an anonymous message from someone who had seen an image of the doll online and felt a nervous feeling in their stomach. They claimed to have wanted to look away, but felt as though Peggy's eyes were drawing them in. Later that night, while looking at HD Paranormal's page for updates on Peggy, this person clicked on an image of the doll. Their screen froze and Peggy's image filled their whole screen. A feeling of panic washed over them and an unlit candle on the other side of the room fell over. They suddenly heard someone breathe right next to them, causing them to jump out of bed. They stood in the corner of their room staring at their bed and claimed to have heard the sound of someone walking around their bed. The room went cold. They sat on the edge of their bed and began praying. As they did this, the atmosphere returned to normal, and oddly enough, the laptop with Peggy's face stuck on the screen had turned off. April 2015. Linda Winstanley of Wigan, United Kingdom, claims to have had a dream about a woman who said her name was Peggy. As she was trying to make out the features of this woman's face, she was awoken by the ringing of her cell phone. Only when she checked her phone, there were no messages or calls. She decided to draw the figure she had seen in her dream. That drawing is on screen now. December 2015. Emery Duffy of Carlton, Georgia accidentally stumbles upon an article about Peggy while on their phone. While reading the article, they were overcome with a feeling of compassion and empathy for the doll, feeling as though Peggy had gone through something worthy of those emotions. Emery claims that while researching the doll further, their phone would constantly act up, web pages would suddenly not be supported, or the phone would lose internet. They also report the feeling of light brushes against their hair and tingling sensations along their legs, feet, and face. Also in December of 2015, Tiffany Duquette of Saranac Lake, New York, claims to have had a vivid dream of her floating in front of a screen, being sucked into a photo of Peggy on the screen. After that, she recalls seeing a lovely woman by the name of Peggy Ann Miller, who was walking with a young boy aged 13 or 14. Listening to their conversation, Tiffany concluded that this was Peggy's son, and that she was bringing him to a train station. He was leaving her for a while to participate in something mandatory. Suddenly, Peggy stumbled. Tiffany explains that it was like Peggy had a vision. Her son said something about people thinking she was crazy. He seemed to resent his mother, and she looked very sad. She awoke to the sound of the train's brakes and whistle. April of 2016. Stephen Bishop of Warrington Paranormal has a panic attack after attempting to contact Peggy through a photo. Also in April of 2016, Mila Smith in the UK reports that while looking at Peggy online, she felt a tightening in her chest, followed by a sharp pain. When she looked, she had discovered that she had been scratched and provided a photo. In December of 2016, Paula Letham from the UK sent Jane an email about the experiences she had been having since watching a video of Peggy online. She states that after watching the video, it felt as though the atmosphere in her house had changed. She felt cold and had the feeling she was being watched, as if someone were standing right behind her. As she laid in bed that night, she heard something that sounded like someone moving around her room, followed by a cold breeze on her face. Every time she started to fall asleep, she was having terrible visions of a woman in black with a glowing white face and black eyes. She states that she had dreams, and in the corner of every one of them, this lady in black was there. She woke up in the middle of the night screaming. After she awoke, she became aware of a very dark presence in her room, standing by the bedroom door. She couldn't sleep or get the visions of the lady with the glowing face out of her head. The next morning she left her house in an effort to get away from this strange sense of dread she felt. Her email ends stating that she was still out of the house while writing this, expressing that she is dreading having to return later, saying that something is standing in the dark, terrifying her. She says the video of Peggy she's seen was part of a top 5, and she was not aware of the doll's reputation before seeing the video, which is why I was kind enough to give you guys a disclaimer. She had reached out to Jane looking for reassurance that she was not crazy and that this would go away. Jane replied to Paula 2 days later, and Paula informed her that the night terrors only lasted 2 days, and stopped once she began avoiding images and video of Peggy. It's worth noting that Jane herself also reports experiencing a similar phenomenon in regards to dreams involving Peggy, claiming that the few times that she has had dreams about her, she dreamt of a woman that looked to be about 50 years old with blonde hair and piercing dark eyes, standing close to her bed and staring directly at her. Every time she would have one of these dreams, she would wake in a panic and struggle to return to sleep. In January of 2017, Jane received an email addressed to Peggy that read, "Dear Peggy, I would like to apologize for looking at pictures of you online without your permission, and I am sorry for not believing that you could do any harm to me. I deeply regret doing what I did, and I hope that you can somehow forgive me. Sincerely, Stephanie." Jane reached out to Stephanie to get more information, and Stephanie replied stating that she has been having very bad chest and shoulder pains, and even went to the hospital a few times because of it. She has also had a nightmare in which she was in some sort of dark dungeon-like room with menacing voices echoing all around her. She thought it would be wise to ask Peggy for forgiveness in the hopes her pain and nightmares would go away. Again, just like in the last case, her pains and nightmares ceased when she stopped looking at photos and video of Peggy online, and avoided anything to do with her. Now, also with Peggy's rising fame came people asking HD Paranormal to bring Peggy out to a public setting. They wanted to see the doll in person. And while Jane was apprehensive at first, given the negative reactions people had experienced just from viewing a photo or video of Peggy, eventually it was decided that for the sake of research, they would conduct a group experiment with Peggy with informed, consenting adults. Not wishing to profit off people potentially risking their health or safety by coming face to face with Peggy, they hosted it as a charity event. This event was held at an old jail turned museum known as Derby Jail, a place said to be one of the most haunted locations in the UK, owned by Richard Felix, a famous historian and TV personality who specializes in ghost tours throughout the UK and Ireland. Richard also attended the event himself. The reason they decided on this location was based on the belief that bringing an object that has a link to the spirit world into a place that also has such a link can strengthen that connection and potentially bring about more potent activity from both the object and the spirits at said location. The event was to be held on October 23, 2015, and they would be accompanied by a trusted psychic medium named Ian Griffiths and his friend Paul Bosworth, who was a paranormal investigator. Prior to the event, Jane had actually spoken with some of the people who bought tickets, and many of them reported very different feelings towards the doll compared to the previous messages that were sent in. Feelings of warmth and love. They felt almost protective in a way, like a parental love. It would seem that there were two sides to this doll, or rather two different spirits attached to it. The spirit that went by Peggy, which was possibly the source of these warm and loving feelings, and then, as Hazel Myers told Jane, there is another spirit, a darker entity present around the doll. Jane reports that both her and Simon felt as though they were being watched while on the trip to Derby Jail, as if with Peggy they were traveling with a party of 3 and not 2. This feeling of being watched made it difficult for them to sleep at their hotel. She notes that despite the doll being in their home 24 hours a day, this trip was the first time they had felt this way. When they arrived at Derby Jail, Peggy was placed in an old prison cell known as the Condemned Cell, with a night vision CCTV camera watching her. While Jane was setting up trigger objects and other devices in the cell, Ian and Paul were attempting to make contact with the spirit world in a nearby room, using a talking board, which Jane describes as being similar to a Ouija board but different in that they are self-made and omit certain elements of a traditional Ouija board. Paul asked for a sign that someone was present with them in the room, and Jane reports that in that moment, she felt as though someone had pushed her in an attempt to knock her off balance. Shortly after that, the investigators all gathered in Peggy's cell, where both Jane and Simon noted that they could smell flowers, roses specifically, but as soon as the smell appeared, it vanished again. They searched the room for air fresheners or anything else that could have caused the smell, but found nothing. The fragrance of roses is believed by some in the paranormal community to be a smell associated with the presence of the Holy Spirit, while others believe it to be a sign of any spirit being present. Jane notes that she had never before experienced such a sudden and obvious scent come and go from an area like it did that night. Shortly after, the guests arrived, and to Jane and Simon's surprise, activity surrounding the doll began almost immediately. 6 or 7 people gathered around a talking board in Peggy's cell to begin a session, while the others crowded around trying to see. Just 10 minutes in, the glass moved and spelt Peggy on the board. Simon went to inform Jane of this, who was in another room setting up equipment, and the two of them rushed back to Peggy's cell. As Jane was approaching the cell, one of the guests by the name of Letitia Hemmings, an investigator with Ghost Echoes Paranormal, was trying to leave the area. Jane asked her if she was okay, to which she told Jane that she felt incredibly uncomfortable sitting around the board, and that this was the second time she had left the cell due to this feeling. She claimed that Peggy or another presence didn't want her there. Letitia later gave a statement on her experience. She says that she felt nervous but also drawn to the doll. When the session began, she sat the furthest away from Peggy across the table. She claims that through the board, Peggy had answered a few questions from the other guests, but when Letitia spoke, it told her to leave, which she immediately complied with and left the cell. Shortly after, she returned to the cell and sat next to Peggy. She reports that as she was sitting there, she felt an awful burning sensation between her legs that was so bad she had to leave the room again. She went to the bathroom believing that she might be bleeding. After calming down, she once again returned to the cell, and while she was sitting there, she claims to have had a vision of a woman being sexually assaulted and saw a lot of blood. Not long after the vision, she got butterflies in her stomach. She claims that she had asked Peggy a few times if she could touch her, to which the board's response was no, and then get out. To be fair, that would be my response as well. Letitia claims that interacting with the doll was like interacting with two different spirits. Jane also notes that during this spirit board session, EMF meters were spiking immediately after questions were being asked, in a way that seemed far too accurate to be random fluctuations. Now, some of the guests chose not to enter the cell area and instead remained in the day room where they could watch the CCTV monitor. These guests later informed Jane and the others that during the spirit board session, they had all seen a shadow that moved slightly to the left of the doll where no one was sitting. They checked the light source in the area and confirmed that a normal shadow was not able to be cast in this way. On top of that, they noticed that after the spirit board session had been closed and the EMF meters were no longer fluctuating, the shadow was no longer there. Now, afterwards, Jane took a series of photographs of the cell, one of which appeared to have some sort of unknown shadow in it. Jane believes that the shadow, if it is a spirit, is that of a male figure, which I believe is this blob in the bottom left. Obviously, without being there, it's difficult to tell if this is just a normal shadow cast by something in the area, or if it's even a shadow at all. That being said, on its own, it's not really evidence of anything, but Jane shared it as a part of her investigation, and so I'm sharing it with you. Anyways, for the remainder of the event, Peggy was less active and nothing more of note really occurred. In late April of 2015, Jane Harris received an email from the producers of the famous ghost hunting show Ghost Adventures, hosted by Zak Bagans. Zak had apparently seen Peggy's story online and was intrigued by the number of people being affected by her. So he offered to fly Jane and Peggy to Las Vegas to take part in a new show he was working on. That show being Deadly Possessions, a mini-series focusing on a variety of alleged cursed and haunted objects. After speaking to the producer Casey Dale over the phone and sharing her experiences with the doll, he decided it would be a good idea to also invite Katrine Redick to appear on the show to discuss her experience, the woman who had suffered a heart attack allegedly in response to a video of Peggy. To avoid the hassle and potential bad luck of plane travel with a 3-foot haunted doll, Peggy was shipped to the US ahead of time, luckily without being lost. Jane, her husband Simon, Katrine Redick, and of course Peggy were picked up from their hotel and driven to a discreet filming location. This location was just an inconspicuous building at the time, but it's currently the site of Zak Bagans' Haunted Museum, a museum full of allegedly cursed and haunted items, serial killer memorabilia, and all sorts of creepy oddities. I was there last October, as you can see from my all-access pass that I kept, and I have to say it's very impressive. If you're ever in Las Vegas, I highly recommend taking the tour. Anyways, upon arrival, the producer Casey brought out an old suitcase to put Peggy in as a prop. But the doll was larger than he had expected, which prompted him to then make a strange request. He asked Jane if it would be alright to place a black bag over Peggy's head, at Zak's request. The reason being was that Zak Bagans wasn't sure he wanted to see Peggy himself, with the knowledge of what had happened to others who had seen the doll. He is also a dog lover and was concerned about the reported sometimes fatal effects Peggy had on canine companions. At least, that is what was said in Jane's book. However, I've watched the episode of Deadly Possessions, and when Jane brings the doll in, Zak asks her why it has a bag over its head. So it's unclear if Zak actually didn't request this, or if he did and then pretended he didn't know for the show. After the bag was placed over Peggy's head, they went inside and commenced filming. The first segment filmed was an interview. Zach and Jane sat in a couple large throne-like chairs, while Peggy was placed in an old wooden children's seat next to them. Jane reports that Zach was noticeably uncomfortable upon first seeing Peggy, and that throughout the interview his uneasiness only increased. She also reports that during this interview, they were being constantly pestered by flies that would land on their faces while they were speaking, more so on Zach than on Jane. This was noted to be particularly strange because not only were they inside where they had not previously seen any flies, but their cameraman Aaron said that in all his time in Las Vegas, he had actually never even seen a fly. Yet for some reason, there seemed to be many of them suddenly disrupting the interview. Zach noted that these sorts of infestations were common in cases of a demonic presence. The flies got so bad that they actually had to take a break from filming. This wouldn't actually be the only time that flies would appear in relation to Peggy. Sometime after the filming of Deadly Possessions, Jane appeared on a French talk show to discuss her work. In front of a studio audience, Jane was being asked about Peggy, while an image of the doll appeared on a large screen in the backdrop. During this interview, when the interviewer was discussing the topic of Peggy, he was constantly being pestered by flies, despite having no previous issues throughout the show prior to speaking about Peggy. While it could be just a coincidence, it is very strange that both times Jane was interviewed about Peggy in two different places across the world, flies appeared to disrupt the interview. Note, however, that on the second occasion, Peggy was not even physically present. Anyways, going back to Deadly Possessions, when they returned to filming after breaking due to the flies, Zach suggested that they finally remove the bag from Peggy's head. And in that moment, Billy Tolley, a crew member in the control room, shouted that the camera facing Peggy had inexplicably turned off, while the others remained on and functioning normally. Zach rushed into the control room to confirm this for himself, and found that the interview room camera did indeed turn off. He believed that it may be a sign from Peggy that she did not want to be seen. Still though, they opted to remove the bag. Zach insisted that Jane remove the bag with Peggy facing away from him, stating that he didn't want a heart attack. In fact, not even the cameraman wanted to look at the doll. After finishing the interview, Katrine Redick went in to do her interview, and no other strange occurrences took place until shortly after that, when Jane, Simon, and Katrine were sitting around a table off-set. Suddenly, the production manager Jamie Schultz came in and asked if they could all wait outside, as something was going on. Jamie was unable to tell them what that thing was, and none of the other staff members seemed to know what was happening either. According to Jane, they waited outside for about an hour before Jamie returned and told them that they could go back inside. It wasn't until later that Zach apologized for the delay and told Jane that he had experienced some strange emotions as a result of being around Peggy. Feelings of anger and rage. At the time, he said nothing more about it to Jane. However, the episode of Deadly Possessions displays more of what happened during this hour delay. Zach became very angry and agitated, pacing around and saying that he felt the urge to hit things and even to kill members of the crew. He said that he almost put his hand through one of the windows in the room, and shortly after knocked something over before going outside to cool off. I have my suspicions about this particular occurrence because in the episode, Zach has this fit of rage immediately after Jane's interview because she removes the bag from the doll's head. However, in Jane's sort of behind the scenes retelling, Zach does Katrine's interview right after Jane's, so he would not be having a fit of rage at that time. The show makes it seem as though they do an interview with Jane and then one with Katrine and then a second interview with Jane where she removes the bag from the doll. And Zach has his little breakdown. So the timeline of events between what the episode shows and Jane's retelling of the filming that day doesn't line up, making it seem as though it may have been staged. But I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that Jane's retelling may have not been clear enough on the timeline, or that the show's editing simply changed the point at which Zach felt this rage for dramatic effect. It's entirely possible that he did have these feelings, just maybe not at the time the episode implied. I don't know. Anyways, the next segment of the show was a seance held by medium Patty Negri, the president of the American Federation of Certified Psychics. Before the show, however, Patty claims to have had her own experience that she believes was tied to the doll. She recounts that after arriving at her hotel, her phone and tablet were behaving strangely, to the point where she had to call tech support and they had to overnight her a new phone, after not being able to determine the issues. She also states that she felt an ominous spirit hanging over her, something that didn't want her there. She then recounts that other things in her hotel room began to act up. The TVs would turn on and off on their own, and the shower in the bathroom would do the same. Because of this, Patty was very excited about what sort of doll she would be meeting the next day, and Peggy did not disappoint. The focus of the seance being held by Patty was for Katrine to release the negative power that Peggy had over her. At the table sat Patty, Zach, Jane, Katrine, another investigator from Ghost Adventures named Jay Wasley, and of course, Peggy. The first strange occurrence during the seance that was immediately pointed out by Jane was that the candles behind Peggy were behaving strangely. There were 3 candles in a row that were flickering one at a time, almost as if someone had been running their hand across them. As Zach states in the episode, none of the other candles in the room were doing this, despite many of them being the same type of candle. I will point out though that throughout the episode you can clearly see other candles in the room also flickering in similar ways. So, anything from small breezes to people moving or breathing could be making the candles behave in that way. Immediately after talking about the candles, however, you can hear the sound of the antique typewriter behind Peggy that nobody is standing near. It sounds as though somebody is attempting to type with it. At that point, the group decides to leave Katrine alone with the doll, in order for her to face her fears and try to overcome the hold Peggy has on her. Patty Negri notes that Peggy is feeding on Katrine's fear, and that it makes her more powerful. When the group returns, Katrine says that she feels the same stabbing in her chest she felt when she had her first heart attack, and Patty takes a knife and cuts the air between Katrine and Peggy, presumably as a gesture she believes was cutting the hold Peggy had on Katrine. There wasn't anything else of note that happened throughout the Deadly Possessions episode on Peggy. It was only about a 24-minute segment. But in Jane's book, she provides some details that seem to have been cut from the episode for whatever reason. She notes that Zach pointed out that the candles behind Patty were melting at an extremely fast rate, compared to any of the other candles in the room, and that they all watched as the wax dripped quickly down the shelf. Jane also recalls that her chair was moving during the seance, stating that it felt as though a dog was passing underneath the table, a sensation that Katrine was also experiencing. Zach said that he did notice the chair moving. She also notes that Patty described feeling a very strong energy, a female energy and also a male energy. This is consistent with what Hazel Myers had described as well, with there being a kinder female spirit and a much darker male one. In the foreword of Jane's book, which was written by Patty, she says that during the seance, she tuned into a beautiful female spirit inside Peggy, noting that this was not the entity causing heart attacks and making people sick. That was something darker, deeper, and more hidden. She says, quote, "The girl spirit within Peggy is a bright light. The darker, more hidden spirit, just the opposite." According to Jane, while Patty was describing the spirit as dark, her voice began sounding croaky. Patty explained that she felt as though her airways were being constricted, as if someone did not want her to speak. Patty claims that this is how a lot of people will feel if they connect to the spirits around the doll, and that it's likely that they will feel chest and throat pain. Jane also claims that when they returned to the room after leaving Katrine with Peggy, to everyone's surprise, she was hugging the doll, and that afterwards Katrine felt much happier and calmer. This did not happen in the episode. It showed them return to the room, and Katrine was sitting there still looking very uncomfortable and talking about a stabbing pain. So at this point, I'm a little confused and my skepticism radar is going off a little bit. Not only did the episode seemingly cut everything Patty said about the doll and the spirits attached to it, and also her not being able to breathe, it also had a completely different ending to Katrine's one-on-one with Peggy than the one described in Jane's book. So either the episode of Deadly Possessions for some reason cut out or even reshot important moments, or Jane is embellishing the story. I could accept that they cut things down for time, but leaving out the psychic not being able to breathe and her explanation of the spirits attached to Peggy seems like a strange thing to cut. And then showing them walk in the room where Katrine was in fact not hugging the doll, despite Jane saying she was, is very suspicious, and I'm not sure who to believe, if anybody. Anyways, the episode aired on April 16th of 2016, and it was met with quite a bit of responses online. Many viewers were understandably terrified to look at Peggy, many claiming to have had reactions from seeing her. Most of this chatter came from Twitter, so I'll read to you some of the tweets people sent out. Since I watched Peggy on the episode, I became sick and it won't get better. This can't be Hazard, but I still want to see her again. Peggy affected me also, big time. I had pain in my chest for almost 2 hours during and after watching the episode. After watching Peggy the doll, I got severe pains and had to go to the hospital. I felt pressure in my head / dizzy and a warm blood rush from my head to toes after looking at Peggy the doll. Okay, well, watching Peggy the doll last night, my mother suffered an aneurysm. She's in the hospital right now. Was during the seance. My head is pounding. I felt you, Zach, with the anger. For real, she is pretty powerful. In addition to these tweets, Jane was receiving multiple concerning messages from viewers containing photos of scratches, burn marks, and even medical reports for things people claim to have suffered from staring directly at Peggy during the episode. I've not seen these medical reports, so I can't confirm their legitimacy. One of the messages Jane received was from a woman named Laura McCormick and her sister Mary in Doncaster, UK. Laura claims that while watching the episode of Deadly Possessions, a bite mark appeared on her sister's arm. She states that out of nowhere they all witnessed it appear. She says that she then got her Ouija board out and it spelled out Peggy. Her board then started freaking out and the planchette was moving around so fast her hands came off of it. Typically, I don't like to interject with my own opinion too much, but that story sounds totally made up. Just saying. Her sister said that since receiving the bite mark, she had the flu and a headache so bad it got to the point she couldn't lift her head, despite being totally fine the day before. This is the photo they sent in. I don't know if it's only because I have a black and white image, but I don't see a bite mark. Again, keep in mind that at this point people are already aware of the symptoms that Peggy has allegedly caused in people. So suggestion, placebo, or straight up making shit up cannot be ruled out as it was with the earlier messages involving Peggy. I've seen the episode twice and I've had no reactions from seeing Peggy whatsoever. Messages from people with headaches and chest pains wasn't the worst of it, however. Sometime after the episode aired, someone posted a photo on Facebook of Katrine Redick in a hospital bed. Apparently, Katrine had watched the episode, and as a result, began thinking about Peggy again. She started feeling unwell and had a stroke. It seems as though Peggy was not quite done with her. Jane contacted Patty Negri, who assured her that when Katrine recovered, she would be doing more in-depth spiritual work with her to sever the hold Peggy had over her. As far as I'm aware, Katrine has not had any other negative experiences in relation to Peggy since. It's also worth noting that one of the crew members on Deadly Possessions, who Jane refers to as Butler Theodore, who was responsible for letting Jane and Peggy inside the museum for a shot in the show's intro, suffered a stroke shortly after filming the episode. Some fans of the show believe that the stroke was caused by Theodore mocking a different doll, Robert the doll, in episode 1 of the series. However, Jane notes that Peggy was the last object he had encountered before his stroke, which leaves her wondering whether or not she might have had something to do with it. Unfortunately, Katrine and Theodore would not be the only ones to suffer strokes potentially linked to Peggy. Things were notably peaceful throughout the couple months following the Deadly Possessions filming. Peggy had been safely returned home with Jane and Simon, and all was well, until about February 27th, 2016. A paranormal investigator with Rembrandt Investigation Services by the name of Olivia Taylor contacted Jane asking if anyone besides Jane had ever done a lone vigil with Peggy. Olivia was new in the field and wanting to develop her experience, particularly in regards to haunted objects, so she met with Jane to discuss the possibility of spending a night alone with Peggy. After discussing it with Simon, they decided that Olivia seemed level-headed and well-informed enough. However, before allowing the vigil, they made Olivia get a health checkup to ensure her heart was healthy given the previous experiences people had with Peggy. A few days later, Jane received an unexpected call from Hazel Myers, asking what has been going on with Peggy lately. Jane explained the situation with Olivia Taylor, and Hazel interrupted her. So that's what it is. Jane asked her what she was talking about, to which Hazel explained that she had a dream the night before. Someone whispered in her ear saying, "Wait and see what I can do," in a mocking, boasting tone. She didn't know what it meant, but she woke up thinking of Peggy. She told Jane that it could be nothing, but to be careful just in case. Despite being a little worried after this conversation, the following day, Jane arranged for Olivia to have her vigil with Peggy. They didn't want to bring Peggy to Olivia's home in fear of the spirits forming a bond or connection to the place, so they decided on a neutral location, a small hotel room. This way, if Olivia at any point felt too uncomfortable and wanted to leave, she could do so, and Jane could retrieve the doll in the morning. Peggy was placed in a hotel room along with 2 audio recorders, an EMF meter, motion detectors, and some trigger objects. Jane only set one rule for Olivia for her own safety: do not touch the doll. She also left a bottle of holy water on the dresser before leaving Olivia alone with Peggy for the night. Jane notes that the entire time she was in the hotel room setting up, she felt as though she was being watched by someone who was standing close behind her. Little did she know at the time, the night was not about to go well for Olivia. According to Olivia, the first 2 to 3 hours were uneventful, besides a couple temperature fluctuations. It was around 12:15 a.m. when things took a turn for the worst. Olivia had been asking Peggy all sorts of questions out loud, asking her who she was or if she could confirm how many fingers Olivia was holding up by tapping. Suddenly, Olivia felt incredibly cold down her right side. The EMF meter fluctuated. To what color she doesn't say. But at that moment, she began feeling a tingling sensation in her wrist that then spread up her arm. She ran her hand under warm water in the bathroom, but the sensation didn't go away. She sat on her hand for about 3 minutes and felt as though the tingling had calmed down. She states that at this time she was feeling uneasy and like she was being watched. She tried to pick up her pen to take note of everything, but noticed that her right arm was very weak. It felt as though she had slept on it and it was full of pins and needles. She went to get some water out of her bag, but at this point she felt so weak that she was unable to unzip the bag. She began to panic and, in a moment of desperation, walked right up to Peggy, looked her in the eyes and asked, "Are you doing this?" She then felt a sharp pain in her head, and the arm that had been tingling went completely numb. She laid on the bed and suddenly the room was spinning. She is unsure how long this went on for, as she states that she had no sense of time at all. It could have been only a few minutes, or it could have been an hour. At some point during this, she felt as though she had enough strength to reach for her phone. She called Jane, but doesn't remember what she said to her, if anything at all. Olivia blacked out, and the next thing she remembers seeing was paramedics coming into the room, followed by Jane and Simon. She was taken to the hospital and woke up the next day around 1 p.m., luckily without any permanent health issues. According to the doctors, she had suffered a sudden lack of oxygen to the brain that could have been fatal. Olivia had a stroke. Of course, there isn't any proof that this was Peggy's doing. However, the chances of someone as young and healthy as she was having a stroke, coupled with the timing of her being in a room alone with Peggy, is something that neither she or Jane believes to be a coincidence. At the end of Olivia's statement, she says that while this experience hasn't scared her away from investigating the paranormal, she definitely will not be getting involved with Peggy anymore. She says, quote, "No offense to Jane or Cy, but I don't see the point in risking my life. And if anyone else is thinking of doing what I did, just don't." After Olivia's stroke, and after the many reactions from the viewers of Deadly Possessions, including Katrine Riedick, who had not only suffered a heart attack but now a stroke as well, there came a point where Jane and Simon felt that exposing any more people to Peggy was not a good idea. They decided that if they could not help the spirits attached to Peggy move on, or could not even understand what was attached to the doll, then the only thing they could do was contain the energy and prevent it from negatively affecting anyone else. They were at first considering sealing Peggy in a custom cabinet forever, much like how Annabelle is stored at the Warrens Museum. But before locking her away for good, Peggy had one last appearance to make. An appearance they had agreed to long before making the decision to not do any more appearances. This was an event held at a haunted location in Leicester, England known as Molly O'Grady's. There isn't too many interesting things that occurred during this event, but I felt it was worth noting that at one point a woman's camera began to zoom in on Peggy without anyone touching the camera, something that Jane had witnessed herself standing next to it. Another investigator by the name of Lee Steer decided to blow on Peggy's hair in an attempt to get some sort of reaction. At this very moment, there was a huge spike on the static meter that hadn't had any fluctuations prior to that. The biggest takeaway from this event, however, was that much like the case at Derby Jail, there seemed to be no activity in any area not in the vicinity of Peggy. Jane notes in her book that when bringing Peggy into haunted locations, it seems that the other spirits there hide or go quiet. Molly O'Grady's was noted to be one of the most active locations for the team hosting the event over the years, but on this occasion, it was dead. No activity from Ouija boards, EMF meters, or any of the other equipment, and no one in attendance felt any kind of presence. One theory is that the darker spirit attached to Peggy is terrifying the other spirits in these locations, to the point that they simply do not show themselves when it's present. In June of 2016, shortly after the event at Molly O'Grady's, Peggy was taken to one last psychic by the name of Philip Lawley in Wolverhampton, England. Philip had gathered a small group of his spiritualist friends to take part in the meeting. They sat in a circle and joined hands, including Peggy as part of the circle. When they did this, Jane reports that she felt a shock from Peggy's hand, akin to a small electric shock, making her jump. Philip recited the Lord's Prayer in Latin, and at that point, Jane noticed something strange. A small light hovering in the center of the circle. She immediately looked around the room for a light source to explain it, but found nothing that could have been causing the light. To Jane's surprise, nobody else in the room seemed to notice the light. One of the participants, an elderly woman by the name of Mrs. Morris, suddenly reported that she felt cold down her right side. Philip very abruptly stood up and said, "Would the person carrying the pouch of salt please remove it from their pocket?" The group looked around, but nobody said anything. He then repeated the request in a more hurried and anxious tone, as if he had tuned into something that really did not want the salt in the circle. A young man in the group suddenly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bag of salt and placed it on a cabinet behind him. Jane then describes a very bright pale ball of light, about the size of a tangerine, appearing above the circle. It lasted a few seconds and then faded away. Those who were in attendance reported the feeling of a close presence when the light appeared. Nothing else of note occurred during the session. This was the last time that Peggy had been brought to some sort of event or gathering. As, like I said, Jane and Simon at this point were more concerned about containing the doll rather than showing it off or exploring it further, for the safety of not only their children, but also anyone who might come into contact with it. In January of 2017, Jane received a call from Zach Baggins, and she immediately knew what he was going to ask her. Zach wanted to house Peggy in his Las Vegas museum. She was unsure at first, as many of Peggy's followers on social media were unhappy with the way the doll was treated on Zach's show, particularly because of the bag over its head. Still, however, Jane heard him out. He explained that he wanted to give Peggy her very own room at the museum, and that he had actually already set a room aside, stating that the experiences they had during the seance affected him in such a strong way that he kept one of the rooms empty to one day welcome her. From their discussion, Jane concluded that Zach had a lot of respect for Peggy and for the paranormal in general. Jane decided that after the doll had consumed over 2 years of her life, it was time for her and her family to move on. She also wanted Peggy's story to be shared, and felt that Zach could share it with infinitely more people than she ever could. So after some discussion, and as Jane admits, a little bit of sadness, it was agreed that Peggy's new home would be Zach Bagans' Haunted Museum in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, as I said, I've been to the museum and I've been in the room with Peggy, so I can tell you a little bit about it. First of all, many guests of the museum have reported a variety of symptoms when meeting Peggy, including most of the stuff we have already heard: dizziness, nausea, headaches, chest pain, etc. I'm not going to be sharing specific stories from different visitors in this video, but you can look it up and see many people sharing their experiences with Peggy at Zach's museum. But for those of you who are curious, when booking a tour at the museum, they make you sign a waiver stating that you are aware of the risks involved with coming into contact with the items inside, and that they take no legal responsibilities for any emotional or physical damage they may cause. Obviously, Peggy is a big part of why that waiver exists. So anyways, from the time they open till the time they close, a tour group will be visiting Peggy about every 15 minutes or so. From my experience, what they do is they line the tour group up along the wall outside of Peggy's room and ask that if anyone is uncomfortable with seeing Peggy, they should form a line on the opposite wall. Those people are to wait outside Peggy's room for the tour to continue. If I remember correctly, Peggy was one of 4 exhibits where people had the option to not go in. For the people that do enter Peggy's room, they had 2 rules. The first is that you must say hi to Peggy when you enter and bye to her when you leave. And the second is that you should not look her directly in the eyes. In the room, they have Peggy in a glass case behind a railing so people can't get too close. They also have a spirit box constantly running in the room for people to attempt to speak to Peggy. Now, when I was there, we actually got quite a few strange responses from the spirit box. First of all, Peggy was calling the tour guide all sorts of vile names. Slut and whore were a couple I was able to make out. The tour guide noted that Peggy does this all the time. The guide then opened it up for questions from the guests. I didn't ask anything, as most of the questions got no responses, until one guest asked Peggy how old she was. There was a very clear response from the spirit box: ageless. The guide then asked Peggy if she could name anyone in the room, and this was one of the weirder parts of the tour for me. A voice came through on one of the many channels being scanned by the spirit box, and it said something that sounded like Tre. Now, you know me as Belial, but my real name is Trey. I'm quite the skeptic, so I could have just heard what my brain wanted to hear, sort of like a placebo effect. Or it could have been any random radio channel just making a sound that sounded similar to my name. The tour guide said, "I don't think that's anyone's name, Peggy," and we laughed it off. I didn't say anything, but I knew if it was really attempting to say a name, it was mine. Anyways, shortly after that, we all said bye to Peggy and left the room, and nobody, as far as I know, had any of the negative symptoms associated with coming into contact with Peggy. I had even made eye contact with the doll a couple times despite the rule. It was hard not to look. And still, nothing happened. Although I was still cautious about staring for too long. Skeptical or not, there is some part of us that when told not to stare into the eyes of a haunted doll, you hesitate to break that rule, whether you believe it or not. Anyways, the fun news, and the reason I decided to take the time to study Peggy and make this video, is because I'm going back to Zach's museum very soon. This time not for a tour, but for the late night investigation. And I'm going all by myself, so I'm hoping to have a longer one-on-one with Peggy, and potentially pick something up on my audio recorder or EMF. I'm not allowed to record video, so if I do happen to catch something, it will be only audio. But either way, I'm excited, and I will let you guys know how that goes, either on my Instagram or on YouTube if I actually manage to catch something that's worth uploading. But enough about me. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in booking a tour of Zach's Haunted Museum and meeting Peggy for yourself, but other than that, I have no more information for you. If the stories surrounding this doll are true, then Peggy is easily one of the most dangerous haunted items in the world, having caused multiple strokes, a heart attack, and even the deaths of a few animals. But what do you think? Is Peggy fact, fiction, or somewhere in between? Let me know in the comments if the images I've shared of Peggy today have had any effect on you. And until next time, take care and good night.